Unidentified. My Top UFO Cases by Hector V. Bello, March 2018. The Roswell UFO incident. In mid 1947, a United States Army Air Force's balloon crashed at a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Following wide initial interest in the crashed flying disc, the U.S. military stated that it was merely a conventional weather balloon. Interest subsequently waned until the 1970s, or until the late 1970s, when ufologists began promoting a variety of increasingly elaborate conspiracy theories, claiming that one or more alien spacecraft had crash landed and the extraterrestrial occupants had been recovered by the military, who then engaged in a cover up. In the 1990s, the U.S. military published two reports disclosing the true nature of the crashed objects: a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul. Nevertheless, the Roswell incident continues to be of interest in popular media, and conspiracy theories surrounding the event persist. Roswell has been described as the world's most famous, most exhaustively investigated, and most thoroughly debunked UFO claim. The events of 1947. The sequence of events was triggered by the crash of a Project Mogul balloon near Roswell. On June 14, 1947, William Brazel, a foreman working on the Foster homestead, noticed clusters of debris approximately 30 miles north of Roswell, New Mexico. This dates, or about 3 weeks before July 8th appeared in later stories featuring Brazel, but the initial press release from the Roswell Army Airfield, RAAF, said the find was sometime last week, suggesting Brazel found the debris in early July. Brazel told the Roswell Daily Record that he and his son saw a large area of bright wreckage made up of rubble or rubber strips, tinfoil, and rather tough paper and sticks. He paid little attention to it, but returned on July 4th with his son, wife, and daughter to gather up the materials. Some accounts have described Brazel as having gathered some of the material earlier with some brush. The next day, Brazel heard reports about flying discs and wondered if that was what he had picked up. On July 7th, Brazel saw Sheriff Wilcox and whispered, kind of confidential like, that he may have found a flying disc. Another account quotes Wilcox as saying Brazel reported the object on July 6th. Wilcox called the RAAF Major Jesse Marcel, and a man in plain clothes accompanied Brazel back to the ranch, where more pieces were picked up. We spent a couple of hours Monday afternoon, July 7th, looking for any more parts of the weather device, said Marcel. We found a few more patches of tinfoil and rubber. On July 8, 1947, Roswell Army Airfield Public Information Officer Walter Haut issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Operations Group had recovered a flying disc, which had crashed on a ranch near Roswell, as described in the July 9, 1947 edition of the Roswell Daily Record. The balloon which held it up, if that was how it worked, must have been 12 feet long. Brazel felt, measuring the distance by the size of the room in which he sat. The rubber was smoky gray in color and scattered over an area of about 200 yards in diameter. When the debris was gathered up, the tinfoil paper, tape, and sticks made a bundle about 3 feet long and 7 or 8 inches thick, while the rubber made a bundle of about 18 or 20 inches long and about 18 inches thick. In all, he estimated the entire lots would have weighed about 5 pounds. There was no sign of any or any metal in the area, which might have been used for an engine. No sign of any propellers of any kind, although at least one paper fin had been glued onto some of the tin foil. There were no words to be found anywhere on the instrument, although there were letters on some parts, or on some of the parts. Considerable scotch tape and some tape with flowers printed upon it had been used in the construction. No strings or wires were to be found, but there were some eyelets in the paper to indicate that some sort of attachment may have been used. A telex to a Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) office from the Fort Worth, Texas office quoted a major from the 8th Air Force, also based in Fort Worth at Carswell Air Force Base, on July 8, 1947, as saying, "The disc is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from a balloon by cable, which balloon was approximately 20 feet in diameter." Major Curtin further advises that the object found resembles a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had no unintelligible born out this belief. Early on Tuesday, July 8th, the RAAF issued a press release, which was immediately picked up by numerous news outlets. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of the Chase County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, whom in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters. Colonel William H. Blankhurt, commanding officer of the 509th, contacted General Roger M. Ramey of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, and Ramey ordered the object to be flown to Fort Worth Army Airfield. At the base, Warrant Officer Irvin Newton confirmed Ramey's preliminary opinion, identifying the object as being a weather balloon and its kites, a nickname for a radar reflector used to track the balloons from the ground. Another news release was issued, this time from the Fort Worth base, describing the object as being a weather balloon. The military decided to conceal the true purpose of the crash device, nuclear test monitoring, and instead informed the public that the crash was of a weather balloon. Later that day, the press reported that Commanding General of the 8th Air Force, Roger Ramey, had stated that a weather balloon was recovered by the RAAF personnel. A press conference was held featuring debris, foil, rubber, and wood, said to be from the crashed object, which matched the weather balloon description. Historian Robert Goldberg wrote that the intended effect was achieved. The story died the next day. Subsequently, the incident faded from the attention of UFO enthusiasts for more than 30 years. Growing interest in 1978 through 1994. Between 1978 and the early 1990s, UFO researchers such as Stanton T. Friedman, William Moore, Carl T. Flock, and the team of Kevin D. Randall and Donald R. Schmidt interviewed several hundred people who claimed to have had a connection with the event at Roswell in 1947. Hundreds of documents were obtained via the Freedom of Information Act. Along with other documents such as Majestic 12 that were supposedly leaked by insiders. The conclusions were at least that one alien spacecraft crashed near Roswell, alien bodies had been recovered, and a government cover-up of the incident had taken place. Over the years, books, articles, and television specials brought the 1947 incidents significant notoriety. By the mid-1990s, public polls, such as a 1997 CNN Time poll, revealed that the majority of people interviewed believed that aliens had indeed visited Earth and that aliens had landed at Roswell, but that all the relevant information had been kept secret by the US government. Although to anthropologists Susan Harding and Kathleen Stewart, the Roswell story was the prime example of how disclosure moved from the fringes to the mainstream according to the prevailing zeitgeist, public preoccupation of the 1980s with conspiracy, cover-up, and repression aligned well with Roswell narratives as told in the sensational books which were being published. Friedman's initial work in 1978, nuclear physicist and author Stanton T. Friedman interviewed Jesse Marcel, the only person known to have accompanied the Roswell debris from where it was recovered to Fort Worth, where reporters saw material which was claimed to be part of the recovered object. The accounts given by Friedman and others in the following years elevated Roswell from a forgotten incident to perhaps one of the most famous UFO cases of all time. The Roswell incident in 1980. The first conspiracy book about Roswell was The Roswell Incident 1980 by Charles Berlitz and William Moore, authors who had previously written popular books on the Philadelphia Experiment and the Bermuda Triangle. Historian Kathy Olmsted writes that the material in this book had come to be known as version 1 of the Roswell myth. Berlitz and Moore's narrative holds that an alien craft was flying over the New Mexico desert, observing US nuclear weapons activity, but crashed after being hit by lightning, killing the aliens on board. A government cover-up duly followed. The authors claimed to have interviewed over 90 witnesses. Though he was uncredited, Friedman carried out some research for the book. The Roswell incident featured accounts of debris described by Marcel as nothing made of this earth. Additional accounts by Bill Brazel and Mac Brazel, neighbor Floyd Proctor, and Walt Whitman Jr., son of newsman W.E. Whitman, who had interviewed Mac Brazel, suggested the material Marcel recovered had super strength not associated with a weather balloon. The book introduced the contention that debris, which was recovered by Marcel at the Foster Ranch, visible in photographs, showing Marcel posing with the debris was substituted for debris from a weather device as part of a cover up. The book also claimed that the debris recovered from the ranch was not permitted a close inspection by the press. The efforts by the military were described as being intended to discredit and counteract the growing hysteria towards flying saucers. Two accounts of witness intimidation were included in the book, including the incarceration of Mac Brazel. The book also introduced the secondhand stories of civil engineer Barney Burnett and a group of archaeology students from an unidentified university seeing alien wreckage and bodies while in the desert. Berlitz and Moore's narrative was dominant until the late 1980s, when other authors, attracted by the commercial potential of writing about Roswell, started producing rival accounts. Another book, UFO Crash at Roswell, 1991. Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt published UFO Crash at Roswell. They added 100 new witnesses, altered the Titans narrative, or altered and tightened the narrative, and included several sinister new twists. Some new details included accounts of a gouge that extended from 400 to 500 feet at the ranch, and descriptions of an elaborate cordon and recovery operation. Several witnesses in the Roswell incident described being turned back from the Foster Ranch by armed military police, but extensive descriptions were not given. The Barnett accounts were mentioned, though the dates and locations were changed from the accounts found in the Roswell incident. In the new account, Brazel was described as leading the Army to a second crash site on the ranch, at which point the Army personnel were supposedly horrified to find civilians there already. Glenn Dennis was produced as a supposedly important witness in 1989 after calling the hotline when an episode of Unsolved Mysteries featured the Roswell incident. His description of Roswell alien autopsies were the first account that said that there were alien corpses at the Roswell Army Air Base. Randall and Schmidt's book sold 160,000 copies. The Crash at Corona, 1992. In 1992, Stanton Friedman re-entered the scene with his own book, The Crash at Corona, co-authored by Don Berliner, an author of books of space and aviation. Goldberg writes that Friedman, too, introduced new witnesses and that he added to the narrative by doubling the number of flying saucers to 2 and the number of aliens to 8, 2 of which were said to have survived and been taken into custody by the government. The truth about the UFO crash at Roswell in 1994. Randall Schmidt responded with another book updating their previous narrative with several new details, including the claim that alien bodies were taken by cargo plane and viewed by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was curious about their appearance. The day after Roswell, in 1997, former Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso reported in his autobiographical book that the Roswell crash did happen, and that when he was assigned to Fort Riley in Kansas in July 1947, 5 trucks of 5 tons and some semi-trailers entered the base from Fort Bliss in Texas. He claimed while he was patrolling the base, he was brought into a medical facilities by Sergeant Brown and shown the remnants of bodies that were from an air crash. Philip Klass analyzed his claims line by line and exposed many inconsistencies of and factual errors. Competing accounts, the existence of so many differing accounts by 1994 led to a schism among ufologists about the events at Roswell. The Center for UFO Studies, CUFOs, or CUFOs, and the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, the two leading UFO societies, disagreed in their views of the various scenarios presented by Randall Schmidt and Friedman Berliner. Several conferences were held to try to resolve the differences. One issue under discussion was where Burnett's was when he saw the alien craft. He was said to have encountered a 1992 UFO conference, had attempted to achieve the consensus among the various scenarios portrayed in Crash at Corona and UFO Crash at Roswell. However, the publication of the truth about the UFO crash at Roswell had resolved the Burnett problem by simply ignoring Burnett and citing a new location for the alien craft recovery, including a new group of archaeologists not connected to the ones the Barnett story cited. Don Schmidt held that variations in narratives between different writers was not, however, an essential problem, commenting by way of comparison, "We know Jesus Christ was crucified, we just don't know where." Problems with witness accounts. Hundreds of people were interviewed by the various researchers, but critics point out that only a few of these people claimed to have seen debris or aliens. Most witnesses were repeating the claims of others, and their testimony would be considered hearsay in an American court of law, and therefore inadmissible as evidence. Of the 90 people claimed to have been interviewed by the Roswell incident, for the Roswell incident, the testimony of only 25 appear in the book, and only 7 of these people saw the debris. Of these, 5 handled the debris. P. Flock in Roswell, Inconvenient Facts and the Will to Believe, 2001, makes a similar point about the Randall and Schmidt UFO crash at Roswell. Approximately 271 people are listed in the book who were contacted and interviewed for the book, and this number does not include those who chose to remain anonymous, meaning more than 300 witnesses were interviewed. A figure P. Flock said the authors frequently cited. Of these 300 plus individuals, only 41 can be considered genuine first or second hand witnesses to the events in and around Roswell or at the Fort Worth Army Airfield, and 23 can be reasonably thought to have seen physical evidence, debris recovered from the Foster Ranch. Of these, only 7 have asserted anything suggestive of otherworldly origins from the debris or for the debris. As for the accounts from those who claimed to have seen aliens, critics identified problems ranging from the reliability of the second-hand accounts to credibility problems with witnesses making demonstrable false claims or multiple contradictory accounts to dubious deathbed confessions or accounts from elderly and easily confused witnesses. P. Flock noted that only 4 people with supposed first-hand knowledge of alien bodies were interviewed and identified by Roswell authors: Frank Kaufman, Jim Ragsdale, Lieutenant Colonel Albert Lovejoy Duran, and Gerard Anderson. Duran is mentioned in a brief footnote in The Truth About the UFO's Crash at Roswell and Never Again, while others while the other three all have serious credibility problems. A problem with all the accounts, changed critics, is that they came about a minimum of 31 years after the events in question, and in many cases were recounted for more than 40 years after the fact. Not only there are memories this old of dubious reliability, they were also subject of contamination from other accounts. Interviewees may have been exposed to the shifting claims of Jesse Marcel, who's suspicious that was that what he recovered, who's suspicious that what he recovered in 1947 was not of this world, sparked interest in the incidents in the first place, cast serious doubt on the reliability of what he claimed to be true. In the Roswell incident, Marcel stated, actually, this material had been locked like tinfoil and balsa wood, or may have looked like tinfoil and balsa wood. But the resemblance ended there. They took one picture of me on the floor holding up some of the less interesting metallic debris. They took that one photo was pieces of the actual stuff we found. It was not a staged photo. Timothy Printy points Timothy Printy points out that the material Marcel positively identified as being part of what he recovered is material that skeptics and UFO advocates agree is debris from a balloon device. After that fact was pointed out to him, Marcel changed his story to say that that material was not what he had recovered. Skeptics like Robert Todd argued that Marcel had a history of embellishment and exaggeration, such as claiming that to have been a pilot and having received 5 air medals for shooting down enemy planes, claims that were that were all found to be false. And skeptics feel that his evolving Roswell story was simply another instance of his tendency to fabricate. Air Force reports 1994 to 1997. In response to these reports, and after the United States congressional inquiries, the General Accounting Office launched an inquiry directed directed the Office of the United States Secretary of the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. The result was summarized in 2 reports. The first, released in 1994, concluded that the material recovered in 1947 was likely debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons. The second report, released in 1997, concluded that reports of recovered alien bodies were likely a combination of innocently transformed memories of accidents involving military casualties with memories of recovery of anthropomorphic dummies in military programs such as the 1950s Operation High Dive, mixed with hoaxes perpetrated by various witnesses and UFO proponents. The psychological effects of time compression and confusion about the events occurred explained the discrepancy with the years in question. The Air Force reports were dismissed by UFO proponents as being either disinformation or simply implausible, though skeptical researchers such as Philip J. Klass and Robert Todd, who had been expressing doubts regarding accounts of aliens for several years, used the reports as the basis for skeptical responses to claims by UFO proponents. After the release of the Air Force reports, several books, such as Carl Kurth's The Roswell UFO Crash, What They Don't Want You to Know, 1997, built on the evidence presented in the reports to conclude there is no credible evidence that the remains of an extraterrestrial spacecraft was involved. In the 1990s, skeptics and even some social anthropologists saw the increasingly elaborate accounts of alien crash landings and government cover ups as evidence of a myth being constructed. Recent interest, evidence. Although there is no evidence that a UFO crashed at Roswell, believers firmly hold to the belief that one did and that the truth had been concealed has been concealed as a result of a government conspiracy. B.D. Gildenberg has called the Roswell incident the world's most famous, most exhaustively investigated, and most thoroughly debunked UFO claim. P. Flock said, "The case for Roswell is a classic example of a triumph of quantity over quality. The advocates of the crashed saucer tale simply shovel everything that seems to support their view into the box marked evidence and say, see, look at all of this stuff. We must be right. Never mind the contradictions. Never mind the lack of independent supporting fact. Never mind the blatant absurdities." Korf suggests there are clear incentives for some people to promote the idea of aliens at Roswell, and that many researchers are not doing competent work. The UFO field is comprised of people who are willing to take advantage of the gullibility of others, especially the paying public. Let's not pull any punches here. The Roswell UFO myth has very good business for UFO groups, publishers, Hollywood, the town of Roswell, the media, and ufology. The number of researchers who employ science and its disciplined methodology is appallingly small. B.D. Gildenberg wrote, "There were as many as 11 reported alien recovery sites, and these recoveries bore only a marginal resemblance to the event as initially reported in 1947, or as recounted later by initial witnesses. Some of these new accounts could have been confused accounts of several known recoveries of injured and dead servicemen from 4 military plane crashes that occurred in the area from 1948 to 1950. Other accounts could have been based on memories of recovered test dummies, as suggested by the Air Force in their reports." Charles Ziegler argued that the Roswell story has all the hallmarks of a traditional folk narrative. He identified 6 distinct narratives and a process of transmission via storytellers, with a core story that was created from various witness accounts, and was then shaped and molded by those who carry on the UFO community's tradition. Other witnesses were then sought out to expand the core narrative, with those who give accounts not in line with the core beliefs being repudiated or simply omitted as the gatekeepers, or omitted by the gatekeepers. Others then retold the narrative in its new form. This whole process would repeat over time. In September 2017, the newspaper The Guardian reported on Kodachrome slides, which some had claimed showed a dead space alien. First presented at a witness event in Mexico, organized by Jaime Maussan and attended by almost 7,000 people. Days afterwards, it was revealed that the slides were in fact of a mummified Native American child discovered in 1896 and which had been on display at the Chapin Mesa Archaeological Museum in Mesa Verde, Colorado for many decades. The Roswellian Syndrome. Prominent skeptics Joe Nickell and co-author James McGaha, identified a myth-making process, which they called the Roswellian Syndrome. In this syndrome, a myth is proposed to have five distinct stages of development: incident debunking, submergence, mythologizing, and reemergence and media bandwagon effect. The authors predicted that Roswellian syndrome would play out again and again in other UFO and conspiracy theory stories. Recrimination among ufologists. Glenn Dennis, who testified that Roswell alien autopsies were carried out at the Roswell base, and that he and others were the subjects of threats, were deemed one of the least credible Roswell witnesses by Randall in 1998. In Randall and Schmidt's 1991 book, The UFO Crash at Roswell, Dennis's story was featured prominently. Randall said Dennis was not credible for changing the name of the nurse once we had proved she didn't exist. Dennis' accounts were also doubted by researcher P. Flock. Scientific skeptic author Brian Dunning concurs that Dennis cannot be regarded as a reliable witness, considering that he had seemingly waited over 40 years before he started recounting a series of unconnected events. Such events, Dunning argues, were arbitrarily joined together to form what was to become the most popular narrative of the alleged alien crash. Some prominent ufologists, including Carl T. Flock, Kent Jeffrey, and William L. Moore, have become convinced that there were no aliens or alien spacecraft involved in the Roswell crash. The alien autopsy hoax in 1995 filmed footage purporting to show an alien autopsy and claimed to have been taken by a U.S. military official shortly after the Roswell incident was released by Ray Chantilly, a London-based video entrepreneur. The footage caused an international sensation when it aired on television networks around the world. In 2006, Chantilly admitted that the film was mostly a reconstruction, but continued to claim that it was based on genuine footage now lost, and some original frames that had supposedly survived. A fictionalized version of the creation of the footage and its release was retold in the comedy film Alien Autopsy in 2006. Photo analysis. In an attempt to produce fresh evidence, some researchers used new technology to try to reanalyze photographs of the telegram held by General Ramey during the 1947 press conference. Goldberg writes that the results proved inconclusively, while some claimed they could discern wording like victims of the wreck. Others claimed they saw turn out to be weather balloons. Overall, there was no consensus that anything was legible. U.S. political interest. On October 26, 2007, Bill Richardson, who at the time was the candidate for the Democratic Party nomination for U.S. President, was asked about their releasing government files on Roswell. Richardson responded that when he was a congressman, he attempted to get information on behalf of his New Mexico constituents, but was told by both the Department of Defense and Los Alamos labs that the information was classified. That ticked me off, he said. The government doesn't tell the truth as much as it should on a lot of issues. He promised to work on opening the files if he were elected as president. On October 2002, before airing its Roswell documentary, the Sci-Fi Channel hosted a Washington UFO news conference. John Podesta, President Clinton's chief of staff, appeared as a member of the public relations firm hired by Sci-Fi to help get the government to open up documents on the subject. Podesta stated, "It is time for the government to declassify records that are more than 25 years old and to provide scientists with data that will assist in determining the true nature of the phenomena." When asked during the 2015 interview with GQ magazine about whether he looked up top secret classified information, President Barack Obama replied, "I gotta tell you, it's a little disappointing. People always ask me about Roswell and about the aliens and UFOs, and it turns out the stuff going on that's top secret isn't nearly as exciting as you would expect. In this day and age, it is not as top secret as you would think." Deathbed confessions. As time wore on, it became harder for Roswell researchers to find new evidence to publish. There was potential, though, in the prospect of deathbed confessions from the originally involved in 1947. In 2007, Donald Schmitt and Tom Carey published the book Witness to Roswell, which prominently featured a document said to be a sworn affidavit written by Walter Hautz, who had written the first Army press release about the Roswell crash in 1947. The document apparently kept under seal until Hautz's death in 2005 described how the 1947 crash debris had been discussed by high-ranking staff and how Hautz had seen alien bodies. The claims, however, drew an unimpressed response from ufologists. Dennis Balthasar said that documents was not written by Hautz, and that by 2000 Hautz's mental state was such that he could not recall his basic details about his past, making the details contained in the affidavit seem dubious. Physicist and skeptic Dave Thomas commented, "Is Roswell still the best UFO incident? If it is, UFO proponents should be very, very worried." The other Roswell, in 1948, Aztec, New Mexico UFO incident was a hoaxed flying saucer crash and subject of the book Behind the Flying Saucers, 1950, by Frank Scully. The incident is sometimes referred to as the other Roswell, and parallels have been drawn between the incidents. Area 51, 2011. American journalist Annie Jacobson's Area 51, An Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base, 2011, based on interviews with scientists and engineers who worked in Area 51, dismisses the alien story. She quotes one unmanned source as claiming that Joseph Mengele, a German Schutzstaffel officer and a physician in Auschwitz, was recruited by the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin to produce grotesque child-sized aviators to be remotely piloted and landed in America in order to cause hysteria, similar to Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds, 1938. The aircraft, however, crashed, and the incident was hushed up by the Americans. Jacobson wrote that the bodies found at the crash site were children around 12 years old with large heads and abnormally shaped, oversized eyes. There were neither aliens or consenting airmen, but human guinea pigs. The book was criticized for extensive errors by scientists from the Federation of American Scientists.